Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and Juma Mubarak. Today, we are on day 7 of our 4th International Conference on the Muslim Ummah, themed Governance and Political Authority in the Muslim World. I have some unfortunate news. Today, Dr. Anwar Ibrahim, who was scheduled to be on our panel, will not be joining us. In any case, we have a very lively panel and very qualified panel before us. I want to introduce the moderator of today's panel, um, uh, Dr. Professor Heba Raouf Ezzat. She is a member of the Faculty of Political Science at Ibn Haldun University in Istanbul. Previously, she was the assistant professor of political science and deputy director for the Center for Humanities and Interdisciplinary Studies at Cairo University. She has professored as an adjunct and visiting professor at many universities around the world. She is also the author of a number of publications, of which some are Women, Ethics, and Religion, on the future of women in politics in the Arab world, and her latest, The Political Imagination of Islamists, a conceptual analysis, which is in its second edition in 2005. Dr. Heba, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I welcome everyone. As Professor Owais said, we are missing Dr. Anwar Ibrahim today because he got some emergency issues to deal with. And I'm happy to introduce this eighth session of the conference. And the title of the session is The Way Forward, Defining the Imperatives for the Political Revival of the Ummah. And we are going to have two very distinguished speakers. We have Dr. Hussein ElKazzaz and Dr. Sami Al-Arian. We will start with Dr. Hussein ElKazzaz, who is the director of the Insan Center for Civilization Studies. Dr. Hussein received his Master's of Business Administration degree and MBA as well as PhD in Business Administration and Organizational Behavior from Ohio State University 1988. And then he was assistant professor of management at Alexandria University, Egypt for many years, and then co-founded and was former managing director of Scopus International Consulting Group in the Middle East 2002 to 2012, which was an organizational development consulting firm operating in the MENA region. And then 2012, 2013, he was served as a senior advisor to the democratically elected president of Egypt in charge of the Integrated National Development Strategic Project. And he is currently the director of Insan Center for Civilization Studies in Istanbul. And he is also the author of two published books on management and many reports issued by the center. Dr. Hussein ElKazzaz's contribution will be titled Exploring a New Paradigm for the Revival of the Muslim Ummah. Please, Dr. Hussein, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, my dear sister, Dr. Heba. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. I'm really very pleased to be part of the annual Ummah conference one more time. I have a great deal of appreciation, wallahi, to SIGA and the amazing efforts that the center is doing. This is clearly a topic of epic importance. I'm going to make one central theme in these 30 minutes. The central theme would simply be the following. I'm going to argue that what our Ummah really needs now is to launch a civilizational experience, a new civilizational experience based solely and principally on an Islamic civilizational model. I would be talking about this theme for this session. And I would like to make 4 points in support of this theme. First of all, I would like to define what I mean by a civilizational model, because this is the kind of term that can bear many interpretations. Basically, and very simply, what I mean is the core beliefs, worldviews, basic doctrines, fundamental value systems, and so on and so forth, that guide every aspect of life in any particular society. It guides knowledge, it guides culture, it guides political systems, economic systems, it guides functions of education, health, security, justice, it guides even urban planning and urban practice. It guides the formation of families and the common practices on a societal level. It's basically at the core, at the very core of any human experience. My argument is that it's actually time for the Ummah to revisit the idea that we have been working with for the last couple of centuries at least, which is that we can actually lead civilizational experiences on the basis of coexistence between two civilizational models, the Islamic model and the secular model that came to our nation through this mega colonial project that has taken place and is still going on all over the world. We have managed to live our lives in the last, particularly in the last century, thinking that we can actually adapt the outcome and the manifestation of these two models simultaneously and for them to coexist. My point is, and that's my second point, it's no longer working. The revolutionary streams, the mega changes that we're seeing, the mega unrest that is sweeping our ummah are simply manifestations of this fact. We as an ummah, we cannot combine the two models any longer. We have to make a determination, very conscious determination. We have to read these realities that are taking place, this unrest and revolution and so on, as a sign that we need to make a different determination than the one we made or maybe for a couple of centuries. First of all, that's my third point. My third point is that this is, by the way, a religious duty. Yani, if it's a religious duty for us to make salah, it's a religious duty for us to treat each other well, follow the laws of inheritance and so on and so forth. It's clearly a more fundamental duty to make the Islamic model the core of our lives. This very simple and basic fact is sometimes something we sort of dance around, given the fact that we feel unable to do that. But let me just remind myself that this is a basic religious obligation. Muslims are only exempt from living up to this obligation if they absolutely cannot do it. Yani only in times when the ummah is so weak, and only in times when the ummah is incapable of launching its own civilizational experience, that it can actually live up with conditions of the kind that we lived with for the past 2 centuries. But let's all agree that these are exceptional times. These are not the kinds of things that we can look at when you look at the history of the Islamic civilization and say, yeah, these were 2 very healthy centuries. Why? Because we have actually imported another civilizational model with very, very different doctrine, basic values, worldviews, value systems, and so on, and sort of married it to the Islamic civilizational model and led our lives accordingly. This is not accepted as a preferred reality. This is only accepted as a very regretful necessity. That's my third point. So my first point is, here's what I mean by a civilizational model. Number 2, there are 2 civilizational models competing in our world, in our nation, and it's clearly not working anymore. And number 3, the establishment of the Islamic model as the base of civilizational experiences is a religious obligation. The first point that I would like to make is that in reality, let's just let's acknowledge the fact that neither of the two models has been able, particularly in the last few decades, has been able to assert its dominance over our lives. This is why it's not just that they fail to coexist. They are at a point of their interaction when it's become very hard for any of them to dominate. Let's just be frank with ourselves. The Islamic civilizational model, the basic doctrine, beliefs, ideals, and so on, are now struggling. They are not as strong and as taken for granted as we used to think they were. They are now being challenged very significantly. Granted, the other model as well has not been able to dominate either. And that's creating this incredible civilizational tension, if you will. That's, in my opinion, at the core of all these political tensions and so on and so forth. Let me just take one example just to make things a bit clearer. Okay, I was writing a paper a few weeks ago on national development in Egypt. Someone asked to, okay, let's capture the experience we had and so on and so forth. So I sat down to write and I asked myself the following question. Why have Egyptians not been able to agree to a developmental paradigm for the last 100 years? All right. Although it's very, very clear that Egypt, of course, like every country in our region, needs it and needs it badly, we have never been able to agree to one paradigm that can lead development. You know, when you start a national development program, you need to have a dominant paradigm guiding it. Why haven't we been able to do it? Because the two civilizational models are competing. Think about it. If we want to launch a developmental program in Egypt right now, what is the goal? What's the ultimate goal of development? Should it be the creation of this human that is so driven by progress, that is engaged in this cycle of production, consumption, debt, production, consumption, debt, that is so fond of making quantitative advances in his career, in the number of years of experience he has, in the number of degrees he gets, in the amount of money he makes, in the number of, and the types of services and goods that he can consume? Is this the final, the ultimate target of development? Or is it the person who is advancing in life by becoming more pious, by living up to values of justice, by leaving an imprint in the world in terms of improving the conditions for all humanity, not for himself, and so on and so forth? There are two very different ideals, and you cannot launch a national development program not knowing which human being is the one you're after. You cannot launch a national development program if you don't know what institutions to base this development on. I'll give you an example. In the late 70s, early 80s in Egypt started witnessing, again, after a sort of a disconnection, it started observing the rebirth of multinational companies in Egypt. My profession is I'm a management consultant, so we observed the following phenomenon. We started seeing that these multinationals, with their organizational cultures and so on and so forth, are beginning to create a class of professionals in Egypt that has a very different kind of norm. This class of professionals is being asked or expected to travel all the time, work so hard, make work in these multinationals the core meaning of their lives, and so on and so forth. A few years later, we started observing this phenomena of what we call the financier father. Rather than being a father in a family, the person working in the multinational has become the source of financing the family. He's become the source of financing a much more elaborate lifestyle, consumption, and so on and so forth for his kids and his family. Now, the question is, if you are building a developmental project for a nation, starting with an Islamic model, then you cannot sacrifice the family. It's the basic unit of any Islamic civilization. But these multinationals actually, with time, are going to challenge families very, very significantly. And this is actually happening. Yani. It's not, these are not presumptuous questions. These are things that actually took place. Like I said, I used to work as a management consultant in California at some point in time when I worked there. The divorce rate among consultants was very high. And then when I looked at it a little bit, it was clear, because we were traveling about 35 to 40% of the time of the days of the year. And we accepted it. This is the norm. So whoever designed this institution, the corporation as an institutional base of development, did not at all think of how this design and how the functioning of this incredibly dynamic, efficient, pressure-based machine is going to affect the family, for instance, and the rest of institutions in society. And the result is very clear. So again, back to my question, if you're launching a developmental program and you want to look at one model to adapt, you want to build a paradigm, which institutions would you rather have and put your weight behind? The corporation or the family, if there is a conflict between the two? Of course, we are very, very skilled in saying, oh, let's combine the two. Let's make adjustments and so on. My point is, we have run out of adjustments. That's what we did for a whole century. Now families are actually breaking apart. And actually, we don't also have the sort of corporations that the West has gone. Like I'm saying, none of the two civilizational models is dominant enough now. They are at a very tense moment of their interaction, and so on and so forth. I can continue to give examples, but my point is, again, let me just go to the core of my presentation again. The core is, it is time for this ummah to launch a new civilizational experience. I really appreciate the fact that we're talking at this conference about political authority. My point is, there is going to be a void, a gap, a missing point if we only tackled one aspect of this civilizational experience. In that case, the political system. The political system, you can think of what to do from an Islamic perspective, whether to launch Islamically motivated political systems or to adapt to the kinds of systems that exist now, and so on and so forth. My point is, this is missing the larger picture. The larger picture is these political systems are in very dynamic dialogue and interaction with every other aspect of life. And it's very helpful for us to go down to the basic, to the core source of tension between these competing paradigms. And rather than saying we have democracy and we have democratic institutions and how can we deal with them and so on, which is, I think, is a very, very important discussion. Please don't get me wrong. I think we should go back and say, how about the core value system, worldview, basic doctrine, definition of what the human being is doing on this earth and so on, and how it's reflected in political systems, but also how it's reflected in, like I said, families, how it's reflected in education, how it's reflected in knowledge. That's a huge domain, by the way, that I think, yeah, and my suggestion is we need in one of these Ummah conferences, Dr. Sami, to devote the whole conference to the whole issue of knowledge, because this is one area in which the two paradigms are providing us with extremely different perspectives, points of view, accumulation, definition of relevant questions and models and theories and so on and so forth. And like I said, we can do all the adaptations we can think of. We can do all the middle ground solutions and so on. But then at one point, which is already taking place, this adaptation is not going to work. Trying to merge the two paradigms is not going to work. So my point is, it's time for the Ummah to actually launch this civilization experience on an Islamic, based on an Islamic civilization model. That choice that we made in the last century not to do that and to adapt and to find middle grounds and so on is clearly not working. And maybe we were under the impression that, number one, we can still protect our religion, we can still do a lot of great things with our young people, with ourselves, with our lifestyles, with our families and so on. Please take a look around you, because this is not the reality anymore. We cannot do any of these things, by the way. 20 years from now, if we fall short of addressing this kind of question at such a deep level, we may not be able to see the kinds of Islamic reality that we see now. I don't think we'll see families the way we see them now. And now is a problematic reality, by the way. Yeah, and I'm not saying that now is good, but now at least the institution of the family is still trying to struggle. Yeah, 2 decades later, let's just look at the West and what happened, and so on and so forth. So let's take a deep breath and re-examine this very strategic choice that we as Ummah have taken in the last century. I think we need to re-examine it and be brave about it and understand that there is a lot of cost. But the major cost, I think the major task, I would say, is to break this intellectual barrier. I think we, even the intellects in this Ummah, a lot of us, have sort of put what we call self-appointed mind guards, avoiding this kind of very comprehensive view, totalitarian visions, and so on and so forth. I think it's time to re-examine these questions, given that reality. My task today, in the remaining few minutes, is to just say, if we actually break this barrier, how can it be done? If it's impossible to do, if it's impossible given the imbalance of power, given the civilizational realities that exist today and so on, if it's impossible to think of launching a new civilization experience, then there is no point in what I'm saying, me or others. But my point is, actually, there are ways of doing it. If you break this mind barrier, then let's ask the following very fundamental, very logical question. Have other nations in history before risen from positions of weakness? Has the Islamic Ummah itself, when it started its glorious civilization journey that we are all very fond of, when we started as an Ummah 14 centuries ago, did we actually have all the ingredients of power and influence and institutional base and knowledge accumulation and so on and so forth? We didn't. So if people can actually, and we did, if people can actually rise from a position of weakness, then what can we do to rise from a position of weakness that we are in now? First of all, we need to acknowledge that there is a lot of energy that is being launched in this Ummah nowadays. Look at look at the revolutions, look at the unrest, look at the young people. There is a lot of energy now that we can build on, an energy that needs direction now, that needs to be inspired with these kinds of grandiose ideas, not with sort of adaptive solutions, minor adaptive solutions in every aspect of life. That's not intriguing enough, and that's not going to do the job. So if people can actually rise from a position of weakness, how do they do it? History tells us that they can do it when there are inspirational ideas. Inspirational ideas are very powerful. You read in the literature of civilizational history and civilizational studies and so on, and actually some of the Western civilizational historians give the example of Islam and the rise of Islam as the brightest example in history of how an inspirational idea can build a nation. Because look at it, the Arab Peninsula didn't really have much, like I said, when we started. But within 40 years, the the Islamic civilization was very, very strong and growing. So the question is, are there inspirational ideas that we can adopt now that can stimulate this kind of drive? Number two, history tells us that it's not just ideas. It actually takes very, very special individuals. But these special individuals are not born in vacuums. They need to be the product of, if you will, certain incubators, certain institutions, organizations, mechanisms, societal treatment, and so on, that can actually bring about people who can take these kinds of challenges. I have a great deal of criticism of the Islamic movement that I was part of for a very long time. I consider myself part of it, of course, because I am beginning to really realize now that the incubators that the Islamic movement have put in place in the last few decades at least has failed in producing individuals of that nature, of a lot of entrepreneurship, courage, initiation, and so on. It has produced a lot of individuals with a great deal of patience, with the steadfastness, and so on and so forth. But that's not what's needed to start civilization. What's needed to start civilization is people with a lot of imagination, with a lot of independence, with a lot of courage, and so on and so forth. So my second point is, okay, we need great ideas. We also need great people, and we need the societal backing that can create these people. And that's a very good question for all of us in Islamic movements, in educational centers, and so on and so forth, even in government circles in certain countries interested and so on, to tackle this question. How can we bring about the human being that can be part of the launch of this civilizational experience? Also, history tells us that nations rise when they actually realize the moment that they are living. رحم الله رجلا عرف زمانه فاستقامت له طريقته. The question that needs to be tackled very, very diligently by scholars and thinkers and a lot of people is, what exactly is the nature of this moment that we are trying to launch this experience in? I'm going to claim that it's a moment that you can describe using Quranic terms, يعني, as the moment of bayina. We are not yet at a moment when the civilizational experience can actually take off, but we are not in the phase that we were in the 20th century. We are not shocked, and we are not taken back. We have sort of we are like a person who has awakened. So we need to revisit the literature and the thoughts, and also build our own that tackles the idea of civilizational life cycles to find out the characteristics of this very phase in the life cycle of our experience. I'm going to argue that we are in a very, very critical and very, very delicate phase. This bayina can turn into sort of a regression toward the mean and going back to late 20th century conditions if we don't pay attention to what needs to be done in this particular phase. Al-bayina requires a great deal of attention to all efforts of building awareness, making sure that we have some sort of integrated projects that we are asking people to devote their lives to, abilities to present these projects and these ideals in very, very modern kinds of ways. We cannot keep talking about the 14th century and 12th century and so on as a source of reference. We need to take these ideals, but marry them with this very, very complex moment that we are in. Humanity is very, very different now than it was a few centuries ago. There is no point in keeping to reference, previous centuries and so on, which had very, very different realities. They are not going to guide us. So my point is, we need to actually, that's another lesson from history, we need to realize what's possible, what's needed, what's impossible now but can be possible later, and so on and so forth, and make sure we have our priorities in place. We need to understand that we are still living under a very tight colonial project. The colonial project coupled with this incredible repressive reality that we found, at least in the countries of the Arab Revolution, are two sides of the same coin. We are still living this reality in a very harsh way. So it's going to be a top priority of this Bayina period to confront this reality. You cannot, as an ummah, continue to live with this and coexist and so on and so forth. Finally, if we're going to launch a new civilizational experience, and we are not just dreamers without a direction, as they say, we need to examine very carefully the areas of the very, the areas of tadafu, as we call it in Arabic, the major conflicts and struggles that this civilization experience is going to have to deal with. Because we are part of this world, and this world is full of this kind of conflict, and it's now shifting. We need to realize that the other civilizational model is actually going through an enormous crisis. There is no time to talk about that now, clearly, but this enormous crisis that the secular civilizational model, with its civilizational reality, with its colonial project, and so on and so forth, it's going through a very fundamental kind of a crisis, has been going through it for a while, but now it's at a point where the conflicts and the struggles are of a very, very dangerous nature. And we need to appreciate that if we're going to say, okay, we as a Muslim Ummah, we are going to come up to the world and come up and deliver our new model, new ideal, and so on and so forth. Let's not be naive about it. Let's know exactly what we are dealing with, and have our scholars, our think tanks, our universities, and so on, tackle the question at that level. It's not enough to say China is rising, United States is pulling out of the region. These kinds of things are very interesting, I realize, but we need to actually address the question of what's going to happen based on all these dynamics to our ability to launch this civilizational experience. Because, as I said in the beginning, it's a wajib waqt, it's a religious obligation, and the time has come for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. This was a very eye-opening contribution, and I wrote so many, I took so many notes, but I think that we should delay my comment till the end of the session. And now I'm introducing Professor Sami Al-Arian, our second speaker. Dr. Sami Al-Arian is the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Sabah ad-Din Zaim University in Turkey. And Dr. Sami received his PhD in 1986 and was a tenured academic in the US for 2 decades, receiving Best Teaching Awards at the University of South California and several grants, as well as having over 40 publications in his credit. During his 4 decades in the US, 1975 to 2015, Dr. Sami Al-Arian founded numerous initiatives and published widely in the field of education, research, religion, interfaith, as well as civil and human rights. He was a prolific speaker across many campuses, and he has different books and publications on Palestine, and he is also a human rights activist in the sense that we usually overlook when we are impressed by his academic background. And I will give you the floor, Dr. Sami, because your CV is too long. It's going to take too long, and if I want to speak about my respect to you, it will also add to that. So the floor is yours. Dr. Sami Al-Arian's contribution today in the panel is titled Palestine and the Revival of the Muslim Ummah. So please, Dr. Sami, the floor is yours for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heba, for your kind introduction. And thank you also to my colleague for his excellent presentation, Dr. Hussein ElKazzaz. when we established the center, SIGA, about 3 years ago, what occupied me most was this conception of the Ummah. What do we mean by the Ummah? We do have a Quranic conception, a Quranic meaning that we read in the Quran, spiritual one for that. We also have a historical meaning that extended for about 1,300 years, even though it was up and down. In the words of the Sudanese intellectual giant Abu al-Qasim Haj Hamad, he called it Al-Alamiyya al-Islamiyya al-Ula, the first universalist of universality of Islam. And of course, we have other voices who downplay this historic meaning or this spiritual meaning from its political aspects. We read this, for instance, in the book The Idea of the Muslim World by Jamil Aydin, in which he downplays the political aspect of the Ummah and try basically to argue with the evidence that he presents in the book that what we had was really competition between empires rather than a spiritual venture towards an assertion of a collective will that represents the Muslim body politic. And that this notion of the Ummah in its political phase is really an invention of colonialism as well as political Islam. That basically what he tried to argue. My argument today is going to revolve around, I did write a piece several years ago in which after the Arab Spring and after it was launched and then with the setbacks, is that there were 7 challenges that the people in the area, those who are politically active, they have to face. And 5 of them I can recite very quickly, which I will not go over or delve in today, have to do with the challenge of legitimacy, the challenge of identity, of nationalism and ethnocentrism and sectarianism, the challenge of social justice and economic development, the challenge of modernity. What I will try to focus on today are the other 2 challenges, which I noted in that piece, which is basically the challenge of independence, which is pretty much tied to the question of colonialism and colonial powers and great power competition taking place within the region, within the Islamic world, as well as the geopolitical aspect of that struggle with its immediate challenge, and for that is Israel. And I will explain why that is a huge challenge and how it is tied to the whole revivalist project for the Ummah. So I can probably title this as much as Israel and the revival of the Ummah project, or the geopolitics of the Ummah project. So unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go over a full-fledged detailed presentation. So my presentation will probably highlight the overall understanding and vision, because again, I'm trying to present this from the perspective of Ismail Farouqi's ummatic vision, which he called in his book At-Tawheed, which tries to look at the historical experience of the Muslim Ummah and try to have a thread, and that thread ties it back into the essence and the principles of that civilization in the same way that Dr. Hussein was discussing a few minutes ago, rather than just simply a political project. But my argument is going to be that we can't get out of that without facing that challenge, the challenge of the other, the challenge of colonialism. I'm not here advocating the clash of civilization. I'm really advocating that we cannot get out of the dilemma of the weaknesses that the Ummah suffers from today unless that challenge takes priority. So I will use some, okay, I need to get share. I will use some maps to help in trying to understand this. Okay. All right. Ever since the advent of Islam in the 7th century, Islam has played a crucial role in determining the course of world history. the political transformation of world maps and even international relations. Within a century of the Prophet's death, we could see that the community of Muslims or believers, what we collectively may term as the Ummah, they had spread from the Atlantic to the Indian Oceans, from Islamic Spain in Andalus all the way to China. Perhaps one of the fastest political expansions in the history of mankind, particularly when you look at the rivalries, the empires that existed at the time, whether it was the Byzantine Empire or the Persian Empire, that within a century both have been either were extinguished or they were reduced. This was not a simple political conquest for economic gain or for political domination. But from the start, it was from the beginning, it was the commencement of a unique and sophisticated civilization, a vibrant and rich civilization that became a powerful player at the world scene. But we have to keep in mind that when it arose at the world scene, it was an expression of sovereignty, an expression of independence and ability to express its will and the will of its vision. This spanned almost a millennia. It was this civilization that led the world in all spheres. What people in other parts of the world were calling dark ages, these were golden ages for the Islamic civilization. It was spreading in all spheres of life, in philosophy and law, in political institutions and administration, in economic development and social organizations, in Umran and building architecture, in ethics and legal systems based on the notion of higher values, in science and technology, in trade and commerce, in urban planning, in arts and music, in education and institutions of learning, of waqf, of taking care of the needy, of the downtrodden. It was the golden age of human progress in all parts, in all aspects of society, based on Islamic principles and values. This is what historians or intellectual historians may call Islamic civilization. This is, as I said, is what we term in the first universality of Islam. But this civilization also faced challenges, both internal and external. It wasn't without any challenges. There were real. It was also, but challenged from outside in the realm of politics and geopolitics. But if you look at its spread, there were other civilizations around, but that civilization took over the world with its advancement, particularly for those on the West. Now, some of these internal challenges is that this wasn't a unique one caliphate, as some people romantically would like to present it, like this was all the way with one caliph and a single administration. No, it wasn't like that at all. Actually, at one point, you have 5 different centers: one in Baghdad, one in Cairo, one in the North Africa, in Carthage, or even in India, and so on and so forth. But the point here is that these empires have come and gone, but the civilization itself thrived. People from many geographies and across many continents, they had many languages, many tribes, many people, many cultures, and even many faiths, but they constituted one community as far as they were concerned. They didn't look at them as being belonging to this civilization or that empire. They felt affinity with each other. When people were expelled from Islamic Spain in the 15th century, they were at home when they left and went. They didn't feel that they were foreigners, or they were different citizens, or they were refugees, or being away from their homes. They adjusted. It was this civilization, this feeling that cemented the emergence of the meaning of the one ummah or one community. The bond was strong despite any politics or ideological differences, despite the existence of political dynasties. That's why many people didn't feel when the Ottomans, when the Ottomans conquest came about and they were in charge, that this wasn't really much different, that they can live with that. It was still the same civilizational outlook, vision, so to speak, as in the Quran, that this is one nation. This is one nation, not in the nation, in the meaning of the nation state, but rather one community. وأنا ربكم فاعبدون. I am your Lord. إن هذه أمتكم أمة واحدة وأنا ربكم فاعبدون وأنا ربكم فاتقون. Again, in the same realm as Ismail Farouq would call it the ummatic vision. Here, I mean, even with that, that civilization faced external threats. They came in two major assaults. One was from the Crusaders, and these two assaults came at time of weaknesses and fragmentation and disunity and divisions. And these major assaults came after several centuries, in the 11th century and 12th and 13th century, between 11th and 13th century. And both were successful at the beginning, but they were repelled. One was the Crusaders, as I said, and the other was the Mongols. And because the Crusaders had their own faith, so to speak, they did not accept to be melted within this great civilization, so they were repelled back. They left. But the Mongols, who didn't have a core systems of values, they melted within the Muslim body as within a few years. Now, as that came about, this is, for instance, the Islamic world around the 16th century, and you could see that the spread, I mean, it went all the way across Africa, North Africa, across the, what's termed today the Middle East, and certainly the Balkans in the heart of Europe, as well as the Persia and beyond. So the Islamic body extended, and it was the center of the world, and it was a world player, and actually it was on the offense for many years. As the balance of power shifted when Muslims were kicked out of Spain, and then they started receiving defeats in the heart of Europe, and with the emergence of the age of colonialism, we could see that the balance of power became much weaker. This is during the Ottoman conquest, and this is by the 18th century, where the Ottomans became basically the major representative of the Ummah at the world stage. And again, this is in the age of empires, but still they represented the collective will of the Ummah as far as the Islamic civilization is concerned. What happened, of course, is that the Ottomans fell behind in many spheres, particularly in military technology. And as the West risen in the age of the Enlightenment, as well as when in the advent of the Westphalian Treaty, where Europe was no longer fighting with itself, but it started going outside and launching campaigns by colonizing North America, South America, and eventually the heart of the Muslim world. You could see that much of the Muslim world, those who were under the Ottoman rule or under the different Islamic empires or Islamic emirates or states, they became under the direct colonial rule. That happened quickly in the 19th century and also early 20th century. This is what we call today the age of colonialism. And what happened here is that instead of looking at the Muslim world as being tied in faith and culture across denominations, across languages, across cultures, the colonialists imposed on this region its own system, which is the nation state system, by fragmenting and by dividing and by having these different states emerging and changing the composition of the Muslim Ummah. That this is no longer the Muslim world as it has existed for 1300 years. Now we're dealing with fragments of it. And here we're talking about a system that was imposed without even taking into consideration local considerations. I mean, there were whole segments of peoples who were divided between two nations. One belonged to Britain, the other belonged to France. At any rate, what we ended up with was the fragmentation of the Ottoman Empire, and then the dissolution of that political will, so to speak, called the Caliphate. Regardless of how people looked at it, it represented at the time a symbol, at least, in terms of that the Muslims could actually belong to one ummah, this notion of one ummah politically. And what we have was the fragmentation of the Muslim countries into nation states. And that nation state existed and became the single most powerful ideology that cemented people together. That ideology is nationalism, which until today represents across the world the single most important challenge even to globalization. Now, the argument I'm trying to make is that for this to happen and to occur, it came because of colonialism and because of the goals of colonialist powers. And here we're talking about the what we call the great power politics, or great power competition and geopolitics. As you could see, the Muslim world, after it's been divided and fragmented, the colonial powers, they want to make sure that they could maintain that hegemony and that control. For that to happen, they need to maintain these different countries divided and fragmented and under control. For that to happen, they have to maintain these borders. And to maintain these borders, that means they have to implement regimes, and that these regimes would have to be adhered to, would have to be accepted, they have to be they have to rule the day, so to speak, and they try to exploit whatever divisions, whether on ethnic grounds or sectarian grounds or linguistic grounds, to maintain these kind of divisions. Now, there's a lot of literature out there. You know, the body of literature is full of the different plans and sayings and documents that show how colonialist powers at the time tried to exploit these things and create them and maintain them as the tool by which they can have control over this whole area. I mean, you can look also at the British role in World War I and before and after, as well as the French and other colonialist rules. Now, of course, because of the time consideration, I need to jump quickly and talk about the most important power of the day that is controlling the world, which is the United States, and how it finds it's in its interest to keep that division going. But also, before even the United States became the dominant world power, the British wanted to, in their effort to maintain hegemony and control over Egypt, the Suez Canal, and even beyond, because obviously they had interest in India, that they wanted for this area to maintain its weakness, and that's why they created the State of Israel. Now, I'm not here talking particularly about the history of that struggle, because it's beyond the presentation here, but it was part and parcel, the creation of the State of Israel in the heart, in the midst of the Muslim world, was a major goal for colonialist powers to maintain hegemony and control, and to keep that area fragmented and weak and under control and domination. Now, as World War I and II came about, again, these are some of the differences within the region that existed for centuries, yet they have been more exploited under colonialism to maintain that kind of division and fragmentation, whether in linguistic grounds or other grounds. Now, when the United States came after World War II to become the dominant or major great power around the world, it has certain grand strategies, because the United States obviously went through different phases. It's arguably a young country that came in the 18th century, but within a couple of centuries, it became one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful country around the world. And it has an interest in maintaining the order it created, particularly after World War II. And to maintain that order, they want to make sure that there will be no competition, that they compete with them on any level. Now, of course, the Muslim world, after its fragmentation and its colonizing experience, it's in no way, shape, or form able to challenge that hegemony. Yet, it has the potential, because according to international relations experts like John Mearsheimer, he would tell you that for any country, or for any collection of countries to become a world power, they need at least two things: military power, and they need economic power and population. So when you look at Muslim countries, if you maintain the current demographic compositions, then you're talking about no more than every country, major country, maybe 100 million at best. But there is no way that this can turn into an economic power across the world in which it can compete with existing great powers. In other words, for this to happen, you need real unity to take place. Looking, for instance, today at GDP around the world, the Muslim world collectively, all OIC countries, 57 countries, they all together produce annually about, I believe, $7.6 trillion out of 80 trillion. So that's less than 10% of the world's output. That's when you combine all of them. Even if you take from that only the 6 Gulf countries, obviously Muslims are 1.8 billion. They produce about 7.6 trillion, according to the statistics from the World Bank. But if you look only at even the Gulf countries, all the 6 Gulf countries, they produce, mostly from energy, oil and gas, 1.6 trillion, which is, the collective of about 50 million people. But the people who actually have the direct access to that wealth are only maybe 1 million. These are the sheikdoms and the people they control. So even if you take that further, the 1.6 out of the 7.6, so we're talking about Muslims, 1.8 billion people who have less than 6 trillion. So from that sphere, obviously, they look pretty good, the colonialists. But in terms of demography, they have to keep that fragmentation. They have to keep that nation-state system to maintain the control over it. That's how they have leverage. Now, the U.S. grand strategy, of course, that emerged after World War I was first isolation, but this has died pretty quickly by the Second World War II. And then they have 4 other grand strategies. One was called offshore balancing, which is realists believe in, and that only rises when you have a bipolarity. That's when you have someone else, like the Soviets at the time, or something called collective security, or selective engagement, or liberal hegemony. These are the 4 grand strategies. All of them, the aim, the goal of each one of these is to keep control of the world order as they design it, as they set the rules. And when you look at the Muslim, at the Islamic world, you will find that any attempt to change that fact to whether to unite it, to become independent, to produce at the rate that you are not controlled by the outside, there will be a major assault against them. We could see this very clearly, of course, in the case of Iran today, when it tries to produce its own nuclear energy, how the whole Western structure is trying to frustrate that effort. We see it also in Turkey when it tried to assert its power throughout the region where historically it was able to, how they tried to frustrate it and how they tried to impose certain sanctions, penalties, or different kinds of structures in order to weaken it. In other words, it is very difficult for the Muslim world to unite, to advance in any revival project unless it deals with this situation adequately. Now, you could see here, this is just a few examples, how the United States builds alliances in order to frustrate, in order to prevent people from being a hegemon in their own region. Like in China, this is what's happening today in order to prevent China from becoming a regional hegemon or a great power in its own region, so that it cannot go outside and compete with the United States. So they build these alliances with South Korea, Japan, obviously Taiwan, Vietnam, and other places. How in the against Russia, also against the Soviet Union at the time, they built alliances around them in order to keep these great powers occupied in their own region rather than going outside and compete. We see it in Turkey, where if you see all the neighboring of Turkey, neighboring countries, they are very weak. So they go and create the Kurdish region in northern Syria in order to let Turkey look inwards rather than going outwards and assert its power. And by that, they will try to occupy it where it can also look behind its back, because it could be challenged from within. So in order to maintain this hegemony worldwide, the United States, they built, of course, all these military powers and military alliances. You could see also in terms of Iran, how they have almost 40 different military bases surrounding it, with hundreds. The United States about 8,000 military bases, about 800 worldwide. And also, economically speaking, they want to control the world's economy through making the dollar as the dominant currency in the world. And that's, of course, primarily through the selling of oil and other commodities. Again, I don't have time to go over it, but I have other lectures that explain this. I'm trying just to give you the overall picture here to get into my argument, which is basically this here. When you look at Israel, Israel was created, as I said, as a beachhead, as one of the generals, American generals, General Heba, I believe it was, who said that Israel is an aircraft carrier. That we put it there so that we don't have to fight. The major aim, the major strategic goal of having Israel there is to keep this area divided, fragmented, disunited, always looking over its shoulder, unable to revive itself. Because, of course, they aligned themselves with the goals of the Zionist movement. I mean, they found a functional use of the Zionist movement in order to further their goals, their strategic goal of keeping this area weak and down. And therefore, of course, when we look at the Israeli lobby, for example, and said this is a very powerful lobby in the United States, it wasn't just because of the existence of strong Zionists within the country, within the United States, but also because it suited the overall objective, which is to keep this area fragmented, disunited, and weak and suppressed. So in that sense, we have to understand the meaning of Israel when it comes to colonial designs on the area. that this area is not meant to unite, is not meant to advance in different directions, particularly in the areas of science and technology, industry, and of course the expression of political will. We saw this during the Arab Spring movement. We know when the Arab Spring came, there was all these hopes and ambitions and hope. Israel became immediately antagonistic because they understood that this is not something that they would let it go, because that means their existence would be threatened. Now, a few years ago, and by that I mean about 40 years ago, in 1982, a plan actually came from a strategic thinker who was an aide to, at the time, was Defense Minister Sharon, in which this was in the aftermath of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. This was in 82, 3 years after they withdrew from Sinai, of course, under limited sovereignty. But they basically said that our goal, in order to maintain our control and hegemony over the area, is to fragment it even further. So this was one of the maps in which they look at 5 countries and they wanted to turn them into 14. We're talking about Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Actually, stuff that we see today. This was actually written back in 1982. It was written in Hebrew, but it was translated by Professor Israel Shahak. And he, of course, in his 29-page translation, he outlaid at the beginning the real meaning of this plan. We could also see, that there were designs on Egypt and Sudan. There were designs on the whole region, something like this, where all these, you could see on the right what was before, and on the left what was before, and the right what is after. That in order to this plan basically says, in order to maintain hegemony and control, where Israel become the dominant country in the region, they have to fragment this region along confessional, sectarian, ethnic, linguistic factions. They started this, by the way, all the way back in the 50s. The drive towards dividing Sudan into north, south, and west is a project that the internal defense divisions in the Department of Defense in Israel, as well as in security apparatuses, they have been working on it since the late 50s, and right after Sudan got its independence. The drive to establish a Kurdish state in the midst of the region also has been one of the major goals of Israel, because they think by creating these different smaller countries that they can ally themselves better, and by having that they can maintain their overall hegemony. By also allying themselves with these sheikdoms and Gulf countries, where wealth is concentrated in the hands of the few, in exchange for their protection. This is also one part of maintaining this control. I mean, as I said, there is in 6 countries, the GDP in these 6 countries with less than 50 million people is 1.6 trillion, and most of that money is concentrated in few hands. And by allying themselves with these people in exchange for protection, they can certainly have a lot of leeway and a lot of say in how this area is determined. Now, what I try to give here, stop sharing. What I try to do here basically is to lay down an argument. And that argument is that any revivalist project, to succeed, it cannot ignore what is happening in terms of geopolitics. That Israel has a particular plan, a very determined plan, with all the resources at its disposal to impose this plan. And in fact, it has the whole power of the international system, particularly the United States, in trying to impose its vision on the region. So any revivalist project, if it does not deal with this fact, then it is ignoring the 800-pound gorilla in the room and trying to deal with other stuff that whatever they try, and we've seen that very vividly during the Arab Spring phenomena, and how the forces were allied within months, within weeks of this phenomena in order to defeat and frustrate this. So the only way we can confront this is by having a goal to confront this. And the best way to do this is to resist and to have the notion of resistance and the notion of confronting the Zionist project directly as being one of the major endeavors, as one of the major projects that whoever wants to revive this ummah to work with. In other words, we cannot have our project without seeking independence, without defeating and dismantling the Zionist project. It is key for being independent and to get rid of the foreign control and hegemony. We cannot pursue an ummah project without actually attaining our real independence. We cannot attain our real independence without dealing with the problem of Israel. And as long as Israel exists, the ummah will stay weak and fragmented and disunited and divided and dependent and under control. And if we ignore this or think that somehow Hamas and other groups can deal with it, then we are mistaken, because it's beyond the ability of the Palestinian people to confront Israel. Israel is not something that is just, that's why, what I want to say about Palestine being the central issue of the Ummah, it's not because the Palestinians suffer more. Certainly other people suffered more. I mean, just in the last 10 years, Yemenis and Syrians and Libyans suffered much more than Palestinians. But the importance and the centrality of the Palestinian cause is because of what Israel represents in this international system, in the regional system, and in the different relationships that take place in this region. And therefore, confronting that menace, confronting that threat must become a priority beyond the ability of Palestinians. It has to unite all the efforts. The real revivalist Ummah project must be centered around confronting that, because when that is defeated, then the whole foreign control and hegemony would be weakened, if not totally dismantled. When the Zionist project is dismantled in Palestine, then that's when we can start, in the terms of Abu Qasim Haj Hamad, again, the second universality of Islam after the first one ended almost a century ago. Now, how do we do this is a very important question. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go over it today, but suffice it today that I do have, people can go and see some of my presentations. That to do this, Israel, as in any other human project, it has its own strengths and weaknesses. And I define about 12 imperatives in which I say, if collectively we can bring a massive amount of efforts to confront these 12 imperatives, because they certainly need not just parties and movements and peoples, but also NGOs and certainly social movements and even governments and different powers from around the world, not just in the Arab world or the Muslim world, but even from around the world. We can weaken Israel, and by weakening Israel, it can collapse and it can be dismantled. And when that happens, then we have asserted again the will of the Ummah, and then there will be a higher purpose of how we can maintain again our will and our unity and back into expressing the collective will of the Ummah. And I think that would be basically the manifestation of what we read in Surah Al-Isra, just to say the least. My final word is about Zionism, Judaism, and anti-Semitism, because a lot of people are going to sense that this is anti-Semitic, because they're trying to equate Zionism with anti-Semitism. I say this project actually is the savior of the religion of Judaism, because what happened, and of course I say that in different forums, trying to speak in details about the difference between Zionism and Judaism, is that Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism, obviously, for this audience, they may recognize this. For other audiences, they may be confused. But Zionism is a settler colonialist project that is trying to use basically all kinds of tactics in order to maintain their hegemony over the region. It is not the expression of Judaism in its spiritual or religious expression. So when we defeat and dismantle Zionism, we save Judaism, one of the greatest religions on earth, from this assault of Zionism over it. And by doing that, we would have done a big service to the world. When Jews were persecuted along with Muslims in Islamic Spain, the only place they found for safe refuge was in the Muslim world. And it wasn't just Palestine. They could have gone anywhere from Casablanca to Indonesia. And they were scattered all around. And that's what happens again. If Europe, because of its discrimination and because of its racism and anti-Semitism, cannot absorb its Jewish populations, and they threw them into Palestine, we certainly can absorb them, but not in Palestine, and not at the expense of Palestinian rights, and not certainly at the expense of having a determined state to fragment this region forever. We saw what happened by Israel in trying to frustrate the different advancement in technologies. They didn't look at Egyptian scientists or Iranian scientists or Iraqi scientists or even Canadian scientists for that matter. Any attempt to empower any country or any regime or any people was met with assassination, with frustration, with destruction. That's what we are waiting for. Unless we confront this menace and this threat, our revivalist project will always be simply a project without the potential of being successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sami. It has been a very stimulating presentation. And if I can comment on both presentations, I will start by Dr. Sami and then move to Dr. Hussein. Dr. Sami, I think that you highlighted very well the challenge that is posed by the Zionist entity. But I think that they are aware of that as well. They are aware that they were used by the West and that the Jewish question was solved in that manner to serve capitalism and colonialism. But, and they are working. Actually, I would like to hear more elaboration on that, because if you follow how the alliances were made, Israel is making alliances with the Kurds, is making alliances with India. Very strong ties have been recently established. So it's trying to secure itself from the outer areas of the Arab world, basically, and also penetrate the Muslim countries one by one. The normalization train, as we call it now in the Arab media, Qatar al-Tatbi', you know, started with the Emirates. They are even going further than many of the Arab people can tolerate in terms of speed. And then we are witnessing approachment of Sudan, and then Morocco, and then probably more countries will join in a way. And it's also targeting, but in a very subtle way, the minorities within countries. Like it's trying to sort of appeal to some Christians in the Arab world as a modern country, using the wave of Islamophobia of the West to try to root it in the Muslim world. And I've been reading on and off recently some Christian Arabs and Egyptians basically saying, why are we having this hostility with Israel? This was the project of the Muslim Brothers, you know, mixing cards and mirroring hostilities and of course agonies as well, because there are issues about some of the circumstances of minorities in the Arab world, and we cannot deny it. But part and parcel of that is actually the nation state, not the Muslims at large. This vehicle of anti-terrorism and creating terrorism to be fighting against terrorism, and the whole story of this, like after 9/11, the war on terrorism with all its complications. So I wanted you to elaborate on that, please, further, this new trend of normalization and how Israel is trying to secure itself, because it knows that at one point, maybe the West would change its directions, maybe they would have different alliances. So they need to anchor their influence. And if you look at the foreign policy of Israel, it does not actually suit at all its size, its weight, but they are trying to reach out to anyone that can basically, or any country that can cooperate with them. And of course, the cooperation with India is very indicative, because the shifts in the democracy, unfortunate shifts in the democratic situation in India, and the rise of Hindu fundamentalism suits very well this moment of alliance between Israel and India and other countries as well. In Africa, it has been trying to stretch its influence as well and invest in Africa. So and it's not about alliance with, it's not about normalization with the United Arab Emirates. It's an alliance. So it's not a normalization issue. And what comes from the statements by businessmen in the Arab Emirates and others, it are very striking. They are using the Emirates now, or the Emirates is using them. God knows who is using who. Yeah.
Right.
The second point that I wanted to point to is that it's really important what you mentioned about the borders, but the borders are also changing. So 100 years ago, as Laura Robson mentioned in her important book States of Separation, when she traced the emergence of social engineering and dislocation of minorities in order to suit the design of Sykes-Picot before and after the Sykes-Picot agreement. We are witnessing now the same shifts, moving borders and changing the landscape. So I think that the geostrategic is important, but also it's important to look at the geographic, back to geography, as we say, because there is so much going on this level. It has been always striking for me, actually, how the Zionists managed to basically build alliances with the evangelicals in the United States. And of course, we know that according to the evangelicals themselves and their Armageddon ideas, Israel itself will collapse eventually. But it's not bad to have an alliance that would serve both parties for the time being. And of course, the Israelis don't mind, though they know that inside this doctrine, there are some hostilities towards Jews, because if we can agree politically for now, so let's just seize the opportunity. But I think also that there is so much, so many things make me wonder about, again, who is co-opting whom, because we remember very well when the Israelis went into the Church of Nativity and humiliated the priests, and it was a big scandal in the Arab world. The West did not respond, and I was even surprised that because of the media and the control over the media, many people did not know of the incidents. I went to Latin America, where people are very pious and very much practicing their religiosity within their own culture, and nobody have heard about it. I said to them, Israel went, the Israeli occupation forces went into the Church of Nativity and, undermined the sacredness of the space, etc. During different moments of the Intifada, and they said we never heard of that. So it's actually amazing how the degree of Christian fundamentalism can keep a blind eye regarding the violations of Israel, which makes things very complicated. Somehow betraying Christianity itself at a specific level. So, Yani, if you can elaborate on this normalization wave, I would be very grateful. So, would you like to?
Sure. Thank you very much for your comments. They are on point. As I said before, there's that heart of Israel's strength, and for it to survive and flourish and even expand is to there are certain imperatives that make it that way. And what you mentioned is some of these imperatives. For example, I outlined 12 of them. One of them is aligning themselves with minorities and dictators in the region, because this will allow them to maintain the control and hegemony that they seek, but also will make the other potential adversaries from being able to confront them or to resist. So they, for example, in the 80s, they were seeking to establish a Maronite
Yeah.
controlled government in Lebanon. They tried to have a peace treaty with it, which happened in May 1983, that eventually uh, uh, was overturned because of the resistance. They tried with the Kurds. They tried to establish a Kurdish state, and they have been trying. Mossad has one of the most active stations in the Kurdish areas in Iraq. They have been pursuing that project for decades. In Sudan, they were instrumental in separating South Sudan. In fact, the current president of South Sudan, when he went to Israel, he had next to him a person. He said, if it wasn't for this person, South Sudan would never had its independence. That person was the Mossad chief that worked there for years. If we look at what the alliance that have emerged after the Arab Spring, and you could see that these all the counter-revolutionary forces which are working to frustrate any democratic waves or any democratic rule in the Arab world, Israel is supporting them. They totally disrespect certainly the will of the Arab people, and they want to make sure that would never expressed. We saw during the Arab Spring wave that all these countries that came to ask for liberty, for freedom, for democracy, for dignity, for social justice, they had their national flags in one hand and the Palestinian flag on one hand. So they understand the power, the popular uh, uh, the popular wave when it comes. They would certainly be against the existence and the presence of Israel in the midst. So they allied themselves with dictators. They allied themselves with the minorities. They allied themselves with the class of governments that are threatened by any democratic changes or waves in the region, because they control the wealth of this ummah, as I said earlier, particularly in the areas where there is a abundance of oil and so on and so forth. As far as the evangelicals and the United States, also one of the imperatives I talk about is that Israel would have never survived unless it allied itself with a major power in the world. It started with Britain, and then it went through different phases. At one point it was France. At one point they depended on the money coming from Germany, the compensation money. It's particularly in the late 40s, early 50s, but eventually it settled in the United States, particularly after 1973 and Nixon. It became more of a strategic relationship, and they tried to convince the ruling class in the United States is that they not only serve the strategic interests of the United States, but they can actually advance them. And they try now to become, during Nixon, the idea was that they will be the police because of what happened in Vietnam. The United States didn't want a footprint in the area, so they tried to basically sublease the protection of the area to protect U.S. interests by Iran and Israel. Iran fell under the revolution, so Israel became more of a strategic asset. But even with that, we saw that the U.S. had to come several times since then to the region. And of course, at the urging and nudging of Israel, whether when they toppled Saddam and when they came and they tried to go, and the idea was to go one country after the other. And of course, they couldn't even get the job done in Iraq itself. But Israel still tried to convince them, because of its, again, power in the United States, that it is capable of advancing their interests. But of course, most of its what it's doing today would advance certain people's interests, but certainly not the interest of the people or even the American people, because what's happening is that turning America into an enemy in the hearts of millions and tens of millions. Now, the relationship with the evangelicals is something that is a pact done with the devil, because evangelicals hate Jews. They love Israel, because to them, Israel represents falsely, I believe, it represents the time where Christ is going to come, because they believe in the second coming of Christ, in which, when Christ does, he will give Israel, or the Jews rather, the option of either turning into Christians or they could be killed. But it's really a business more than a belief, because I've contacted many Christians. Those who are truly Christians don't believe in this. They believe more in the values of justice and equality and and fair play and all that. It is those people who manipulate Christianity for their own interests and for their own actually personal gains, and they gain hundreds of millions. But they are unfortunately they have a grip on the evangelical movement in the United States, even though it has weakened, because I think they reached the highest around, I would say, perhaps Reagan throughout George W. Bush, but they have been on the wane since. But they exist, they're still powerful, talking about 40 to 50 million people who claim to be evangelicals, but not all of them are under the sway of these people. In terms of borders, I agree with you that, but shifting or not shifting, because the idea of Israel is to even fragment the current borders even further. They want Iraq to be, and they talked about that openly. And by the way, Biden was one of the first people who talked about it in 1990, 91, during the first or the second Gulf War, rather, when they pushed Iraq from Kuwait, and he was advocating that position, which was a Zionist position at the time. He was really embracing that position. And of course, they worked on it very, very hard during the George W. Bush administration, and effectively they ended up, having it, Sunni areas and Shia areas and the Kurdish areas, and they designed the Iraqi political structure around sectarian and confessional lines. When that's a major problem now that we see today in Iraq. This was a Zionist plan from the beginning. The same thing happened in Lebanon. We could see also their attempt to create a Kurdish state. We see their attempt to split Sudan. We see their attempt everywhere. I mean, this plan is for everybody to see. I remember back in July '83, Sharon gave, he had just resigned as a defense minister in the aftermath of the Sabra Shatila massacres. And then he gave a keynote speech to NATO. NATO usually in July, they would have a conference by military chiefs throughout the NATO countries, and they will invite someone who is prominent to give it. And he gave that speech, and we translated it at the time. Because it didn't have a title, we called it the new map of the Middle East. He was calling to fragment the Middle East further, even including Egypt itself, that had just concluded a peace treaty, and they saw that they need to be a Christian Coptic nation in northern Egypt, along with a Muslim one. And this is how we can maintain peace, by having all these smaller countries, because that's the only way where Israel can maintain its power. And that's what I'm saying, is that if we don't confront this, it will always be the single most potent, threatening thing against any kind of revivalist strategy. Look at what's happening in Tunisia and others, but unfortunately we don't have time to talk about all that.
Thank you very much. I call upon Dr. Hussein. I'm not sure if he is still here. Yeah, Dr. Hussein, I thought you went to go pray
I'm here.
Maghrib.
I'm here all the time.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to engage with your presentation because you focused very much on the model, the Islamic civilization, the model, and then you mentioned two civilizations competing, which is Islam and the West, basically, or Islam and the modern West, the project of modernity. And I think that we can widen the map a bit, because on one hand, the modern project now, through consumerism and commodification of so many dimensions of human existence, basically spread all over the world through globalization. So on one hand, it's not centered in one territory anymore. And on the other hand, there are truly different civilizations on the map that we can engage with. So some of them will not be very hospitable to an alliance with Muslims, but some might find an interesting space of cooperation and mutual understanding. And I think that we also have to focus a bit on the internal, not only critical, but as you mentioned, structural fragmentation that actually took place in our Muslim world, and it has been on and off going on, like any ummah, basically, according to the Quranic understanding, because we also have the fatigue of Sharia. I don't know if you have read the book of Atif Ahmed. It's translated into Arabic, and he talked about the 5th century, the 6th century. There was a talk also about that people are not abiding by Sharia, and there are ups and downs, and then they abide by it again. I mean, I don't know, but I don't mean by not abiding to it leaving Islam. I mean that people don't apply it in everyday life in the same manner that one would expect, for example. And Imam Al-Juwayni wrote about that, basically, khulu al-zaman min imam, and he talked about the notion of futur al-sharia, as much as others like Ghazali and others also mentioned this notion. So there are challenges that are faced inside secularization, or futur al-shara'a generally. It's like a cycle. People, I mean, in the Quranic even stories, in the Quranic qasas, we find it, it starts and there is a peak, and then new generations basically are more lenient about or more disinterested in this practice, and then we have revivals, etc., and reform within different religious traditions. So I think that we also have a challenge here. We have a challenge. On one hand, we are not alone in this confrontation, and on the other hand, we have issues inside that we have to reintroduce Sharia to people, because it has been also demonized by the systems, by the regimes. If you ask someone today, after all this propaganda against Islam on the vehicle of the Muslim Brotherhood, you can agree, disagree, political contestation, etc. But on that vehicle of accusing the Muslim Brothers of being terrorists, there has been a lot of accusations as well addressed to Islam itself, and different regimes have been putting forward figures, intellectual figures or cultural media figures to attack Islam. And we have many examples in the case of Egypt, for example, attacking Al-Bukhari and claiming that the hadith of half of the hadith are not authentic. And so there is this sense of ambiguity and this sense of being disinformed after 2 centuries of secularization. What people know about the deen and the religion compared to 100 years ago, whoever is educated, how much religious knowledge do people have? It's very superficial. And then with social media, we have even more problems regarding that. Yani people go into different websites and applications and ask for fatwas, and God knows who these are who are giving fatwas, So we have this website called Ask, so Ask. So it's very there is a corrosion, there is a real corrosion. And of course, there are intentional plans, one cannot deny, without going into conspiracy theory. This is politics, basically, that there are diverse interests, but at the same time, there are challenges that we have, and you cannot actually do without the modern technology, because it's also helping you spread your ideas and find a way to reach out to people whom you cannot physically meet. So this is one thing that I wanted to highlight. The second thing is actually about how can we, based on the concept around which the conference is centered, how can we actually think about a political paradigm that would be reformative and be futuristic? And I think that we can align it on the notion of the public. So it has to be complex. You don't just call people to come back to Islam, but you have to provide a map. And this map is actually a very complicated map, because what was offered at the beginning of the 20th century is not valid today. The world changed a lot. And you have to have a map, not a route map, not a road map, but rather a map of the topics that people should be engaged with, each and everyone in his or her own capacity. So it all is centered around the notion of the public. So we have to have a public philosophy. You have to translate your notions of Islam, of Deen al-Islam, to notions of al-Amr. إن الله يبعث على رأس كل 100 عام من يجدد لهذه الأمة أمر دينها. So it's Amruddin, not the Deen only. It's Amruddin, how to manage, basically. And you are a professor of management. So how to manage this, how to bring Islam into everyday life and different sectors of economy and society and politics and international relations in a way that actually is based on that core faith of Islam and Tawheed. The second, so the public philosophy is very important, how to formulate it, how to draft it, how to put it in maybe declarations, statements, Intellectuals have to do with that, because there must be a public philosophy in a way, and we have loads of readings that can be basically put in capsules and to be introduced to the majority of people. The second thing related to the public is basically the public discourse. What discourse do you use with the diverse sort of language that we speak today? The language of technology, the language of the language of philosophy, the language of religion, the language of the lay people in the social media and in public media, etc. And then you have to have public debate. This public debate is muted in the non-democratic systems, so people don't even have the ability to engage in debates, and hence hostility is rising. And I again give the example of Muslims and Christians in Egypt. There is an underlying sense of either ignorance about the other or hostility that is basically on the level of the Copts. And I will not say minority, majority. I don't like these words. But basically, this group of citizens basically have Islamophobic ideas, and of course there are reasons for that regarding the clashes on the local level, that can exist. But there has been this feeding, this anger, with a lot of Islamophobia, and I come across many things written on social media that are just typical Islamophobic statements. This Islam has no Sharia. The Sharia is rubbish. Islam spread all over the world with the sword. There was no Islamic civilization. These people are ri'a. It's like I find this written here and there, and during the crisis with the recent crisis with France regarding the caricature, I was surprised that I was browsing through the Facebook and I found some middle class Christians writing "Vive la France," especially with the francophone schools in Cairo. So the Cairean and Alexandrian middle class friends were writing "Vive la France," and it was like it's very hard also to ask them for a very complex understanding. But there are issues here that has to be addressed, and this is not far from what Dr. Sami Al-Arian said, because if you have that anger and that sense of injustice that is actually shared by Muslims as well, but in the case of quote unquote religious groups or minorities, it doubles, and then it takes a different direction. Then you will not surprised when people say, why are we having all these hostilities with Israel, and why not make peace and celebrate and even praise what the United Arab Emirates are doing. So, and then you have the notion of public property that you have to offer, the whole economic dimension of, the public and the private and everything. And then you have the public trust. How can we rebuild trust in a very atomistic society that corrodes that sense of commitment by everyone? And then, as you mentioned, the family is facing challenges. And then we have to talk about public property, not only public space, public property, and the privatization that is going on. It's amazing, and the acquisition of land. And you have to make all these complex maps, public interest. What is the public interest? Is it decided by the military? Is it decided by the people? So all these things related to the public in order to establish a republic, because we have been too busy talking about democracy and whether Islam is democratic or not. And we sometimes did not have a vision, a complex vision of what a republic actually means. So I think we have to rebuild trust in Islam in new generations, and in case of existence of religious minorities as well. And then to build a vision that is more complicated, and to be able to provide every person with what is the roadmap for individuals. Where do we go from here? If someone watches us talking and they would say, if a person is 20 years old, okay, I want to plan my life. Where is the way to go from here in order to achieve what Dr. Sami mentioned regarding the second Islamic revival, or the second Islamic global movement, Pax Islamica, in a way. So this is just engagement with your ideas. I'm just trying to sort of push you a bit more. And also, last but not least, I think that the notion of the secular needs to be a bit scrutinized, because of course there is a secular project in the case of the European modern life, but also there is the secularization process that takes place within each and every religious tradition with historical cycles. So this Futur Sharia that I mentioned to you, of course, I should be very careful to call it secular. I'm trying to find another word for it, but it's basically that there is a distortion of the authentic meaning of faith and the original roots of the Sharia generally in all religions. And this is why the stories in the Quran are addressing how different ummahs, basically, till we reach the Muslim Ummah, witness this rise and fall, and these cycles basically that we can describe. So we have to address that, and hence we have to address that there are these notions with modernity that are more complicated than the secularism of 2 centuries ago. So, for example, the notion of varieties of religious experience, secularization from within, that people say, I am a committed Muslim, but I'm doing so and so, which is not like taking any ummah or collective identity in consideration. So sometimes people call it Catholicizing Islam or something like that. You know, it's like shifting and changing the notion from within, and then the capitalization or the modernization of the practice itself that becomes so individualistic, and hence these varieties of religious experience that sociologists talk about are cycles. So we have to look into that, because you know and I know that we are witnessing and it's not a phenomena, but there are cases of atheism, you know, rising, and there has been interest even in the case of sociological studies to talk about post-religion and post-truth, and you know, new types of, you know, spirituality and etc. So I think this also is a challenge that cannot be attributed only to the modern project. It is an outcome of it, and it needs to be addressed, and hence it's part and parcel of the reformation of Islam in terms of discourse, not in terms of, you know, turning Islam into a Protestant religion or anything. But what I mean by is how do you tackle and how do you present this understanding for new generations and for minorities inside and for people outside, and this globalization of our circumstances and conditions generally. So this is just like second thoughts or speaking up my mind, you know, regarding what you mentioned, because it was actually it was filled with many points. I took so many notes, but I think that we also should do more homework on providing our discourse with a more detailed spherical clarification regarding in each and every domain what would we do, including education, for example. Like always, Dr. Sami stresses that in many talks, you know, the educational dimension and how to educate and how to build the rationale of thinking about Islam in a modern and globalized world.
MashaAllah, Dr. Heba, I really enjoyed your engagement with these thoughts. Let me say the following, because I basically like very much the lines you were going. When you're trying to sort of make I was trying to make this like basic case, you have to, or you at least me, I have to tend to sort of simplify things and go to sort of what looks like bipolar concrete statements like this, because I'm trying to make a case, but let me make a very sort of a blanket disclaimer that of course reality is much more complex than this conceptual representation that you can give in 30 minutes about what's going on in the world. Definitely cycles of human, even you and I as individuals go through these cycles. Everything in life has a cycle. Organizations have cycles, ideas, products, let alone nations. As soon as you start digging into questions like the ones I was trying to get people interested in, then this cyclical nature becomes very central. Some of the decay in the early Islamic civilization experience started very early, as you know. I'm not only talking about the political side, by the way, which is the more famous. I'm talking about the intellectual side, which to me is much more dangerous. And it started very early, which tells you that this experience was resilient enough to last that long in spite of that early decay. So it's actually very complex, and I would argue also that it's not really one cycle. It's a mishmash of many integrated different cycles of different regions, different times, different causes, different issues, and so on. This is how life goes by, So if we are going to start tackling the questions of deep down how to do it and how to understand and so on, definitely we need to look much more carefully than the very sort of abstract outline that I was trying to do. I'm just trying to sell this idea. We worked in our center, as you know, on a project for the last few years. We went back to the very point that you made during your reflections. If a young man or a young woman who's 20 years old now come to us and say, what should I do? Is there anything in what we say that can be helpful to advance a dialogue with this young person? And actually there is. That's the good news. We have reached a point in our discussion tackling certain emerging dynamics of the nature that you talked about, looking carefully at this sort of integration between this new technology and the tensions within it, by the way, and not just these are very, very detailed, complex questions, of course, that go far beyond the scope of the presentation today. But just want to let you know that the kind of engagement you made today is extremely welcome into the debate that we're trying to create around this project. We are fully aware that there is no group of people, intellects or activists or whatever, who can actually, close down their doors for 4 or 5 years, drink very heavy tea, and come up and say, I got it, I have the answer. But what we wanted to do, and hopefully, with comments like the ones you made, mashallah, you give me this this positive feedback that we are succeeding in doing that. We're trying to stimulate debate around these issues, but debate sort of formulated within these broader questions and deeper questions, rather than what I consider to be artificial debate and discourse that's taking place in a lot of circles. Some of the major things we do in our project is going through history and so on, is to try to demonstrate that the moment we are living is really unique. But of course, you can make this argument about any moment in history. It is unique in its own right, but it's unique now for some very fundamentally serious reasons. The Ummah has never been in its history since the Ba'ath of the Prophet ﷺ, dominated to that extent and to that depth. That's a different kind of a ball game altogether. So the questions that need to be addressed and the order of these questions are sort of dictated by the uniqueness of this moment. This is why I get a bit frustrated when I see scholars engaging in what I would consider to be partial questions regarding structures and stuff like that. It's like in my field, when someone gets very obsessed with the idea of the hierarchical organizational structure versus the different kinds and so on and so forth. Because as an organizational,
you are coming back and they are heading ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying, guys,
I've been
this
there.
is a very partial question for anyone who lives in an organization. That, by the way, Dr. Heba, one of the things that got me very frustrated over the years is I realized that a lot of my colleagues in the academia and the intellectual world have actually never ever experienced life in complex organizations deep enough to appreciate what that means, because organizations provide you with a unique unit of analysis. It's not micro, it's not individual, it's not macro, it's not society, it's the level in between. So you see all the dynamics of these two levels playing in the playing field that is actually the most important for both of them, which is really an eye-opener. So a lot of people take these things and simplify them to a very sickening level. And by throwing in some of the ideas that I tried to present today, and mashallah, by your reflections on them, I'm just trying to get people to be encouraged, young and old intellects and activists and so on and so forth, to get everybody to play by different rules, look at different things, address different questions, realize different dynamics. This is not the time to spend a lifetime of a lot of people doing what we call in Egypt التنمية البشرية. Let's learn about strategic planning and counseling and stuff like that. These are very important tools, but when you take them out of context of what they are trying to do, the secularization that you're talking about and so on, they became dangerous. And I definitely agree that there is no one brand of secularism, there is no one brand of Islam, there is one brand of the Islamic experience, and so on and so forth. We are very careful in our center not to use terms like, let's revive the Islamic civilization, let's relive the moment. Anything that starts with we're very sensitive to, because we realize that what we are asking people to do is to build their lives depending on their understanding, given their own dynamic context. And sometimes you look at these contexts, like some of the examples you mentioned, and the complexity of life nowadays is extremely difficult to deal with. But at least you need to have not a roadmap, but an intellectual map. You need to at least know how to ask questions and prioritize them. So you don't ask the let me not say the minute questions. You don't ask the middle ground kind of questions before you address the mega questions.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for engagement. Always a pleasure, Wallahi, Dr. Ayman.
It's my pleasure. We have to bring this session to a close, and thank you, Dr. Sami, for your insightful presentation. Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for an excellent mapping, and we are now we should be moving in, I think, 25 minutes to the following session. So we are closing now this session. Thank you very much for those who attended and followed us on Facebook, and for the next session, inshallah, we will be meeting.